Hello, my name is Stephanie Boozer. I'm with CUGC HQ. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to talk about identity and SSO on Citrix Cloud. And I have heard that this is a fantastic session and I'm excited to hear it. I've had a lot of good feedback from people already who've seen peaks of it at the Irish CUGC meeting. So excited to get us going. Before we do, though, I just want to bring up a couple of CUGC events that are coming up. Next week is our virtual Excel, so you don't have to travel. You can just log in. Definitely hope you'll check that out. We've got some great speakers. Ernie Hudson is our keynote. He's from the Ghostbusters movies, so you might be interested in hearing. He's got evidently a really great story to tell. We've also got Calvin Sue and James Rankin. Those are two of our featured speakers, plus panelists and sponsored demos and lots of stuff. I'm going to throw a link in the chat right now. There you go. That takes you to our events calendar where you can find out more about that. And then the next Excel we have will be in person in Texas. It's at the Houston Zoo. This is the first time I think we've been at a zoo. We've always been at a stadium. So this should be really fun. Got more great speakers for you. I'm sure you recognize some of these people on the slide. We also have a NASA astronaut that's going to do our opening keynote. So that should be really great as well. All right, so check those out. Before we get started, yes, we are recording. So you will get a link to this recording tomorrow. I'll make sure you get that as well as any other links that get shared throughout the session today. So that'll come in an email tomorrow. We have two panels that you can put your questions and your chats in. One is Q&A. We love for you to put your questions in that Q&A pane. It makes it easy for us to find the questions and then do all your chatting in the chat panel. Sometimes it's hard to find the questions if everybody's chatting in the panel and they get lost. So definitely use both of those. I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys today. All right, I've taken up a lot of time. I'm going to hand things over. We have Javier Lopez Santacruz from Citrix, and we have Wendy Gay, also from Citrix. Both are CTAs. Both are involved in the Ireland CUGC group, who has a meeting coming up in March, if you happen to be in the vicinity.
Anyone who's in Dublin, come say hello.
That will be amazing. I want to come. All right, well, I'm going to turn things over to Javier. I think you want to say some more about yourself and introduce yourself. So I'm going to give you that space and I will stop my screen share and hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I think Javier is going to share his screen.
Thank you very much. So hopefully everybody can see my screen.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Stephanie, for inviting me to this Citrix User Group Global Meeting. And also thank you very much to Wendy for supporting me on this, on my first global webinar for this audience. So my name is Javier Lopez Santacruz, and I'm a senior technologist for Citrix. And today I'm going to present this Citrix identity and single sign-on Citrix Cloud session. So for this session, I'm going to, before entering into the session, I'm going to talk a little bit more about myself. So I have been working for Citrix for the last 6 years and a little bit more than 3 years as technologist. I'm also become member of the community in this as a Citrix technology advocate, and I'm active member of the Citrix User Group Ireland. So I told them, and I have several sessions there, and I'm trying to be active on social media and this Twitter and LinkedIn. And also we have a blog where we explain all these technical secrets from Citrix and make it more understandable for the customers and for the IT admins. And the last but not the least, I was finalist of the Citrix Demo Warrior. It's an internal contest that happens internally in Citrix, where we use Citrix technologies and demo with all the Citrix technologies and end user experience. And I was finalist representing EMEA globally. So this is one achievement that I just wanted to share with all the audience. Now, when we are explaining about, or when we are planifying this session, As I mentioned before, I was working as a technologist with very close to customers and explaining them and trying to understand and adopt all the Citrix Cloud technologies. And during all these years, we have a lot of questions for customers. And some of the questions that we have is, what kind of identity providers I can use with Citrix Cloud? Can I use Azure Active Directory? Can I use Google? Can I use Okta? How can I configure, for example, a passwordless authentication with Citrix? What permissions do I need from Azure Active Directory when integrated with Citrix? Do I need federation authentication services or FAS to provide a single sign-on experience? And also, how can I provide single sign-on to any Office 365 application? So what we are trying to do on this presentation is trying to solve all these questions, and hopefully by the end of the presentation, everything will be more clear for the audience.
And I think, Javier, one of the things here, these are questions that come up again and again as our team are delivering POCs and working with our customers. So hopefully this particular session will kind of resonate with this audience, and hopefully we answer some of the questions you're having as well.
Thank you very much, Wendy. So as a end users, or when we are trying to authenticate to any system like personal or corporate or in business, we need to remember a lot of usernames and password every time that you try to access to a service, a website, authenticate with your PC. It's like sometimes can be frustrating because you need to remember all the usernames and password. And usually, or there is an study that says that there is more than 200 unique identities that a normal person is using in a personal and work context at the same time. So you can imagine that remember all these identities can be challenging for some time. When we are talking about end users and corporate end users, it can lead a little bit of frustration, for example, when they try to remember a password, reset their password, accessing to this application, the username is not correct, the password is not correct. So there could be a lot of challenges that can frustrate the users, and not only frustrate, make them less productive. So, I mean, what we are trying to achieve here is simplify the end user experience and make them more productive. The challenge and the frustration is not only for the end users, can be also for the IT admins, is how can I provide or how can I configure this seamless single sign-on experience to provide this the best end user experience for the customers. And also, not only that, the IT admins can be a little bit frustrated with the end users. For example, when they found a post-it with the username and password in the screen or in your laptop. So sometimes can be frustrating for both ends. So what we are trying to achieve here is how can we provide a single sign-on experience with all this modern authentication framework. So the idea is provide this single sign-on. So this is the way, and hopefully with this presentation, we can deliver this integration with Citrix. So now we are going to talk a little bit about the agenda. So for today, the first thing that we are going to do is explain a little bit of the context of identity and authentication in Citrix Cloud and all the steps and all the process that are involved on that. I'm going to do a Chromebook-like demo. A lot of customers are repurposing old Windows devices or buying Chromebooks as a corporate endpoint. It's very powerful, and we are going to show this end user experience. After that, I'm going to break it down in 3 parts. So the first part will be the primary identity for Workspace. The second part, I will talk about the Federation Authentication Service, or what will be this will be the magic piece that is doing this single sign-on for virtual apps and desktop. And to end the presentation, I will talk about the secondary identity. Secondary identity that involves software as a service apps and internal web apps. So we are going to talk very briefly about all the modern authentication frameworks like SAML, Security Assertion Markup Language, or an OpenID Connect or OIDC. And we are going to talk about the differences and how they integrate with Citrix Cloud. And I have a blog that I have published that explains step by step how can you configure your first SAML integration in Citrix Cloud using a Salesforce developer account that is for free. So you can create a Salesforce developer account and you can combine and configure by yourself. So if you are an IT admin and you don't have a lot of knowledge on this authentication framework, that will be a good initiation step to do this integration. And to close this webinar, I will do a live demo from a Windows corporate device. So it's going to be a device that is provisioned by Intune. It's a managed device from the corporate, and we are going to see all this seamless single sign-on experience across the board. So a user logins with the Windows Hello, and after that, you don't need to type any username and password. Every application accessing to Workspace, it will be seamless, and accessing to all your applications, you will see that everything will work out of the box. So
that's brilliant. I'm just popping in all of the blogs that relate to identity into the chat for anyone who's checking out the chat as well.
Very good. Thank you very much, Wendy. So before starting to define in all the authentication, I just want to make it clear for everyone everything that we are going to talk today. So when we have any end user that is trying to access into Citrix to their workspace, usually they have the freedom of choice, so they can use any Windows device, Linux, Android, iOS, any other device that is in the market can access to your applications remotely. So basically they are connecting or via web browser or Workspace app to your Workspace tenant, to your store. So in Citrix Cloud, we have configured the Identity Broker microservice. Basically, the Identity Broker microservice is the component that is in charge of the primary user identity when you try to access to your applications. So as Citrix has been working very, very close for the last 30 years with Active Directory, and in Citrix Cloud, we work in the same way with Active Directory. Citrix doesn't hold any identity, so Citrix doesn't know about any username and password in your organization. Citrix is only brokering the connection. So that means when you configure Windows Active Directory for your end users, you are prompting for username and password. But Citrix is only checking your username and password against your Windows Active Directory. So basically, we deploy a cloud connector that is communicated with your on-prem Active Directory to do all this function. But the Identity Broker microservice is not only working with Windows Active Directory. We have a lot of freedom of choice that you can configure with almost any identity provider in the market. So that means that we can integrate with Okta, and that means that we delegate in Okta the authentication, so we redirect the authentication to Okta when you try to access to your workspace. And if you have any YubiKey installed or you have any passwordless authentication on a prompt verification in your app, you can combine these security authentication policies and make it work alongside Citrix. So that is really, really cool. And the same will happen with Google. So you are using Google as your identity provider for your directory for your end users. We are able to have a native integration with Google. And the same will happen with Azure Active Directory. And if you are using Azure Active Directory and using any conditional access policies, everything will work exactly as you have defined, and Citrix will be integrating with your current security authenticator configuration. So basically, once you pass all this identity process and you successfully authenticating the provider, then we have our resource feed microservice that is the service inside Citrix Cloud that is going to enumerate all your applications. And when we talk about your applications, we are talking about software as a service apps, which is applications that are on the internet that you can access via Citrix, your mobile applications, and also your internal applications and your virtual desktop or virtual apps and desktop. And the interesting part of these internal web apps is, for example, you have an intranet or you have an internal SharePoint that is only available when you are in your office or when you are using VPN and you cannot access via the internet. So with Citrix, we can provide these VPN-less access technologies to access to these internal web applications seamless with Citrix, sorry. And inside the Citrix Cloud, we also have the single sign-on microservice. And the single sign-on microservice is going to be in charge to provide single sign-on to virtual apps and desktop. As I mentioned before, and I'm going to elaborate more during the presentation, if you are using Windows Active Directory, you will have seamless single sign-on to your virtual apps and desktop. But if you change your primary user identity, for example, to Okta, we cannot capture this username and password. So that means that the single sign-on to the VDA will not work. And in this case, that's when the magic from Federation Authentication Services happens. So this will be the component that is going to generate a virtual smart card in the moment of login. And when you click in your application or your desktop, it will generate a certificate that is going to provide the seamless single sign-on experience. So
I think there's a lot of questions, or a couple of questions coming in around FAS and single sign-on and SAML. So I hope that we'll get those answered in the next few slides, but if they don't, just prompt me again in the QA.
Perfect. So no problem for that. So basically FAS will be the component that is providing that. With SAML can be a little bit tricky, and if there is a lot of questions with SAML, I have a screenshot. There is a trick part that is how you sync certain types of attributes from your on-prem Active Directory to your identity provider, that can be Azure Active Directory, Okta, or Google, and then reutilize those on the SAML assertion. But hold on for that. I have a slide explaining all of this and very clear for all the audience. Okay, so I hope I have cleared that. And the last but not the least, how can we provide this secondary user identity, and how can we provide single sign-on with SAML capabilities to any software as a service apps, and also VPN-less access to internal web apps with single sign-on capabilities. So basically, this is the three pillars of the presentation that I'm going to deliver today. And before entering into the presentation, let's see what I'm talking about. Let's see in action how an end user experience is good, integrating all the components that I mentioned. So the first thing that I'm going to do, let me see if I can, yeah, here it is. So I have a Chromebook. I sign off from my Chromebook. So this is a Chrome OS, and this is a managed device from Google Workspace. So Google Workspace acts as a mobile device management and push all the configuration from the cloud directly to the device. So it secures the device and makes a Chromebook a really reliable the corporate device for companies. And in this case, this is a corporate enrollment from Chromebook. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to log in with my user credentials. And as you can see here, I'm going to remove myself from the screen. You can see that this Chromebook automatically install my workspace and have my corporate desktop. And the end user experience is going to be as simple as that. I open my Chrome, I log into my Citrix Cloud tenant, I click sign in, and here something happens very fast. I'm redirecting to Google, and as I have a session in the Chromebook with my username and password, I automatically be able to sign in seamless single sign-on to Citrix. So I'm retrieving the end user session from the laptop and provide this end user experience. I not only single sign-on to Workspace. If I try, for example, to open an intranet, this website is on my internal corporate network. With Citrix, I'm able to access VPN-less access, and I have single sign-on when accessing to my intranet with all these technologies. The same will happen if I try to access to Salesforce. So if I try to open Salesforce, and this is the block that I was commenting before, and I'm going to share later on the presentation, you can configure any software as a service apps and provide this seamless single sign-on. So in my case, you can see that
that's
I have
already shared in the chat for everyone, Javi, just
thank you very much. So if you can see, we have single sign-on to my internal app and my Salesforce, but at the same time, I can do exactly the same. I'm talking about software as a service apps and internal web apps, and also I can open Teams, and I will have exactly the same end user experience. So you can see, the good part of this is take into account that Chromebook only open Play Store app, Google Play Store apps, and Chrome extensions, so you cannot install any application inside Chromebook. But here we are running a Windows Teams inside a Chromebook, and also we have a technology that is able to improve all the video calls for when using Chromebook and Teams. So you can see Citrix XDX optimized, so they will perform the best end user experience when doing any video call using Teams in a Chromebook. And also the same will happen if I try to open any Windows or Linux desktop. So you can see I'm opening here a Windows desktop, and I automatically single sign-on. So FAS is behind this single sign-on experience, and I'm using a Windows session full screen. And if you have multiple monitors, we can do multi-screen with the same session. And I'm using Windows, it's very responsive, and I open my Windows session inside a Chromebook. So you can see I can do full screen, and also I can reduce to have a window. And the same end user experience we will find when we try to open a Linux desktop. So I have my Linux desktop here, and in case that I have developers or I want to publish some Linux desktop for some other purpose, I don't want to pay any Windows licenses, you can do this natively in Citrix Cloud. Okay. So I hope the demo is clear. So basically what we achieve is, without typing any username and password, the end user experience was secure, everything was covered by Citrix, and everything was single sign-on using the same technologies to secure the access for this.
There's a great question has just come in, Javier, around single sign-on in Office 365 with FAS. If you want to take that shortly.
Oh, I have, if you wait until the end of the presentation, I'm going to show you how can you achieve single sign-on to Office 365 inside the VDA with FAS.
Yeah,
so,
and Terry has just asked, in a desktop environment, which is exactly what we're going to cover, Terry, it's not going to be a web app, it's going to be a fully installed version.
That's correct. We are going to cover both. We are going to cover the SaaS app and also inside the desktop. So it's complicated to explain, but we are going to try to do our best. But I have a good example with a Windows corporate device, and I'm going to do single sign-on all across the board, including Office 365 inside the VDA.
One of our top questions, isn't it, within the team around single sign-on into Office 365?
Yeah. It was a challenging learning process, but now we have a very clear understanding of what we can do and how to provide the best end user experience. So, very good. One of the things that I want to discuss here, oh, sorry about this. I'm just moving there. So, one of the things that I want to make clear for all the audience is we are not competing with any Azure Active Directory, Okta, or Google, any identity provider in the market. What we are trying to do from Citrix is we are enabling customers to leverage their current investment on identity. So that means is we are providing the tools for all the customers to integrate and use their current investment on identity and reutilize that with Citrix. Okay, so we're providing the tools. We don't want to replace any identity provider in the market. Okay. The first thing that we are going to talk today is about the primary identity for Citrix Workspace. So it's whenever I try to access to my workspace, what will be the primary identity provider and how does it work? So the first thing is, as I mentioned, the identity broker microservice is the fundamental part inside Citrix Cloud that is going to achieve the integration with any identity provider. And before entering on what we can configure, I just want to mention very briefly a new tech preview that just arrived. And this is a device posture service. So this is going to be a pre-authentication graphic interface engine that is going to run an EPA scan, an endpoint analysis scan, to check the compliance of the device. So that means that before prompting any username of any user when accessing for username and password, there will be a condition that you can define in Citrix Cloud, all via a graphic interface, and you can check, for example, if the device is enrolled with your Active Directory or with your Azure Active Directory, or what is the OS version, if it's a Windows, if it's a Mac, if it's an Android. And you can provide 3 outcomes. So a device can be compliance, a device can be non-compliance, you allow access, but you restrict some of the access to the application, or you can deny login. As you can see here on this part, and this is the 3 outputs.
That's brilliant, Javier. And some questions have come in around device posture check and requiring an on-prem NetScaler. So this is a service where Adaptive Auth is a service provided by Citrix Cloud, correct?
That's correct. This is completely different from adaptive authentication. So what we learn is adaptive authentication requires a lot of expertise in NetScaler to define all the end-flow authentication and all the device posture. So requires a lot of knowledge on this area. The intent of this is be a complementary service. So adaptive authentication is going to work in parallel, but this is for more easy deployment. It's going to be a cloud-native service. And what we are trying to do is make it as simple as possible for the IT admins.
That's great. Thanks, Javi.
Perfect. So now, as I mentioned, there is a tech preview, so we can share the tech preview, the Podio form, if you want to access to this device posture tech preview. And we have been testing. There is an Intune integration that we just released, and it's working really good. And as I mentioned, the device posture is going to check the profile before prompting the user for any username and password. It's more like a security aspect that you can integrate with your identity. And now we are going to review what we can do with the Identity Broker. So as I mentioned, and this is very traditional with Citrix in any on-prem deployment, we have native integration with Windows Active Directory. And we also in cloud have bring a free service that we can apply a multi-factor authentication prompt for all your Active Directory users. And this is a cloud-native deployment, and it's just a matter of turn or click one box, and you have your MFA that will apply for all the end users trying to access to your workspace. So this Identity Broker microservice is also able to implement natively with OpenID Connect, integrate Azure Active Directory, Okta, and Google. And what is this OpenID Connect integration means? That integration means that Citrix is able to talk via REST API directly with any of these identity providers, and we are able to enumerate and associate resources and link directly via native users. In other words, we don't need any Active Directory on-prem at all, any Citrix Cloud connector at all. So I can deploy my Google native users, assign resources via my Google users and groups, and I can deploy, for example, non-domain joint BDAs, or I can deploy any software as a service apps or internal web apps without the requirement of any Active Directory on-prem. And also with Azure Active Directory, we have all the Citrix modern authentication and deployment framework where you can go connectorless. It's out of the scope of this presentation, but this is a very good topic because we can see a lot of companies that are thinking to move to a hybrid environment, mix of Active Directory and Azure Active Directory, or a pure Azure Active Directory deployments. So we have native integration with these three identity providers I mentioned here, with Azure Active Directory, Okta, and Google, and works independent from any Active Directory. We also have, you can use your on-prem, if you are an on-prem user, you can use your NetScaler and your Citrix Gateway or your AAA server to link your current authentication method inside Citrix Cloud. So if you have any deployment from Citrix that you would like to reutilize, you can reutilize. We also provide out of the box adaptive authentication, which basically is a AAA server, but in this case, we host the NetScaler and keep updated for you and for our customers. And the last, but not the least, is SAML 2.0. And SAML 2.0 is very important for Citrix Cloud because we only, with Citrix, with SAML, we can integrate almost any IDP on the market. So any identity provider that is currently in the market, I'm going to say 99%, just in case there is some identity provider that I'm not aware of. 99% have SAML integrator capabilities. So if you want to use Duo, if you want to use Imprivata, Ping, Veridium, SecureAd, any of these identity providers will work seamlessly with Citrix Cloud because we have SAML technologies that are able to integrate this. And just to mention, for example, when we are talking about Azure Active Directory, we have two options. We have the native integration in Citrix Cloud, and you can also configure Azure Active Directory with SAML. But in the case that we configure Azure Active Directory with SAML, we will need to have an on-prem ID to assign the groups. So we can configure Azure Active Directory, but we will need an Active Directory on-prem to sync the users and groups. So that's the main difference between Azure Active Directory OpenID Connect that use native Azure Active Directory users and groups. And with SAML, we will still require to have a cloud connector and Active Directory.
A couple of questions just came in there, and I think you're going to answer them shortly. SAML 2.0, does it utilize OIDC? And I think we're going to answer that in a second because we cover both of those topics quite well. Another question is asked, this deck is going to be shared, it will be shared. And a final question I have here is around secure access. And when we use secure access, a rule that would allow certain apps or desktops. So if we can get a little bit more clarification on what that question is in the questions, I'll answer it then as well.
Yeah, so hopefully the last question I think is referring if we can increase the security when accessing to these applications. For example, if I talk about the case of Chromebook, let me see if I can get the Chromebook, one moment. So if I take about the secure access, for example, if it refers that, for example, I access to my intranet, and if you can see, I have single sign-on provided. And when you mean secure access, I presume that you are talking about all the non-security policies that we have. So in my case, I open the intranet. I'm also single sign-on to this intranet. Let's see. Takes a moment.
All of this is configured in the secure private access piece of our Citrix Cloud tenant as well.
See, it opens. Dun, dun, dun. I'm going to close, I'm going to reopen. Does happen when you do a live demo. I just want to show the same access that I have here, but all with the secure access policies activated. So it's coming, and here it is. So you can see this is a normal access with single sign-on to this internal web app. So I can download any sales report. As you can see, I can copy and paste. There will be no issue to copy and paste. But if I try to access to this application, we are applying all the secure access policies when accessing to this app. So you have the first thing you can see is the single sign-on kick in, so you don't have to type any username and password. But if I try to download a sales report, you will see that download has been restricted by your administrator. If I try to copy and paste, you can see that the clipboard is restricted by your administrator. And also the same will happen if I try to print. Printing has been restricted. And you can see the watermark with the user that is connecting and the IP where they are connecting from. So I hope this was more or less the answer for the secure access question.
Thanks, Javier.
No problem. So let's go for the second step, which is how can we provide, we're going to talk about Federated Authentication Service or FAS. And this is going to be the main Citrix component to provide this single sign-on to virtual apps and desktop when we are not using Active Directory. And I'm going to explain a little bit more on the next few slides. So when we have for user trying to access to the desktop, we have the Identity Broker microservice, and we have Windows Active Directory as configured as an identity provider for Workspace. So whenever I open a desktop, I have a pass-through authentication, and basically what we are doing is collecting the username and password when the user tries to sign in, and getting this username and password and using it in the moment of launching of any virtual application and desktop. And that provides the seamless single sign-on. So this is how Storefront and Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop on-prem has been working until now. Obviously, with Windows Active Directory, we don't have no issue for that. But what happens if we change to Okta or Azure Active Directory or Google or any identity provider? And let's say, for example, in this Okta, we have a passwordless authentication and we are not using password. Microsoft doesn't know any authentication method that is not username and password or certificate. So what will happen is the single sign-on to the virtual apps and desktop will be broken. That doesn't mean that the access will be broken. What will be broken is when you try to access, you will get a prompt for username and password. So you will be required to re-authenticate. And that happens with a lot of customers when they implement Azure Active Directory or Okta, and they try to access to the desktop and they don't know why they are getting prompt again for username and password. And that is the reason, because Microsoft doesn't talk. I'm going to explain this in few slides. So
Javier, one question that came in there was Microsoft CA is the only supported CA for FAS, correct?
At the moment, yes.
Yeah.
We also have, we're in touch with the product manager for Federation Authentication Services, and there is some some PKIs different from Microsoft, and they are trying to get some feedback to implement support for that. So you have a different PKI from Microsoft, please raise a case with your account manager and see if we can get support for this credential authority. So officially, only the Microsoft one, but we are looking forward for adding more into the supported scenario.
Fantastic.
Perfect.
There's lots of great questions coming up here again around FAS, breaking primary, the PRT token, if the machine is AAD, domain joined. So I think we're going to cover that shortly too.
I will going to cover, by the way, I think I'm going to extend maybe 10 minutes more than the hour, 10, 15 minutes by the way that is going. There is a lot of questions and maybe I'm going a little bit slow. But if anyone wants to stay or anyone cannot stay, they can watch the recording after, okay? So coming back to what we were talking before, the challenge is we don't get this single sign-on when accessing to the VDA. And the reason of that is Windows Server and Desktop Operating System only speak username and password or certificate for authentication. So that means even, for example, SAML has been since 2005, is almost 18 years in the market, Microsoft didn't implement any modern authentication framework in the Windows operating system. So Windows doesn't talk with SAML, OAuth, OpenID Connect. I think they are making some improvement now with the PRT and with ABD. There is still some tech preview that are testing, and seems they are getting there, Microsoft, but still is not GA, it's tech previews, and they are coming there. But you know, it took them almost 20 years of adopting all this modern framework authentication inside the operating system. And as I mentioned, this is a Windows 7 Ultimate, but it's basically the same. You can use your smart card or your certificate, which is the same, or your username and password. And as I mentioned, when you configure Azure, Google, Okta, or SAML in the Workspace service, you are using UPN, and the Federation Authentication Service is the cloud component that is going to provide this single sign-on when accessing to the VDA. And it's a virtual smart card or a certificate that we generate at the moment of login. So that's the solution, as I mentioned before. So whenever you are using a different identity provider, this virtual smart card is going to provide the single sign-on when accessing to the VDAs. And here, I'm going to go a little bit fast on this slide, but basically this slide covers what will be a normal deployment on-prem with a PKI. So you have your Microsoft PKI, your credential authority that is linked with your Active Directory, okay? And you have your fast service that is connecting with your PKI, and you have your primary identity provider. I have a generic one here, but can be Azure Active Directory, can be Okta, can be Google. And the main component here is you need to sync a certain type of attributes, username, not only username and email, a certain types of attributes from Azure Active Directory into your Azure Active Directory to make this fast service to work when accessing to the VDA. And I'm going to cover this in the next few slides. So just to summarize, when a user tries to access, they use their identity broker microservice. We go to the cloud when they are successfully logged. We go to the cloud delivery controller, enumerate the VDAs. You click in your VDA. And when you click in your VDA, sorry, the animation is not working. Just a moment. When you click in your VDA, what is going to happen is the Federation Authentication Service in your on-prem is going to talk with your credential authority and is going to ask to generate a certificate. This certificate will be passed to the fast server, and the fast server is going to provide this certificate to your virtual desktop. And if you hold for 10 minutes more, 15 minutes more, I will do a demo and I will show you where can you see this when you open a Windows session. So just summarizing what we saw now, in all the identity providers, we can do pass-through authentication, which means seamless single sign-on to your virtual apps and desktop, doesn't require fast, just with Windows Active Directory. And also, you can have a multi-factor authentication built in Citrix Cloud, and you can deploy this without any complication directly on Citrix Cloud. And if you want to use any identity provider beside Windows Active Directory, the norm is you require fast to provide this single sign-on experience. Okay, and there is 3 exceptions. The first one is Azure Active Directory. So we have this blog written regarding this. So you can configure Azure Active Directory single sign-on access without fast. And the trick for this is enable seamless single sign-on and pass-through authentication for Azure Active Directory. Okay, so and the condition is the end user device that is going to access to the tenant needs to be AD domain joined. If the device is not AD domain joined, you will get a prompt when opening your virtual app or desktop. If the device is domain joined, you will have single sign-on when accessing to the VDAs. So this implementation doesn't require fast. And if you can, Wendy, share this blog in the chat, if anyone wants to take a look at this blog.
Absolutely, will do.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And the other two exceptions that we have is when you deploy your on-prem gateway or adaptive authentication. So in this case, what you can do is use your Active Directory credentials and activate the pass-through in the NetScaler, and then you can have this seamless single sign-on experience. But the norm is, as long as you don't have Active Directory as a primary identity for Workspace, you will require fast to provide single sign-on experience. Okay, and now we arrive to the third part of the presentation. Is we are going to discuss how are we going to provide this secondary user identity and the seamless single sign-on. So for this part, we are going to see what we can offer in terms of this single sign-on. So when a user access to Workspace, we talk about virtual apps, but now we are going to talk about software as a service apps. And software as a service apps are apps that are available on the internet, so you don't need to be in your corporate network or anything like this. And you can use any browser to access to this, and can be, for example, Concur, SharePoint Online, Slack, Gmail or Google Workspace, any Office 365 apps, SAP. So all these applications, we can offer single sign-on capabilities using SAML. So in my case, and as I mentioned before, I created another blog that is going to walk you step by step about how can you configure Salesforce. And basically what we are doing is a SAML integration. So this SAML implementation is already built in Citrix Cloud. You need to configure the identity provider, relay state, design assertion, combine the certificates. But if you don't have much experience with this, you can initiate with the guide that I'm going to share. But if you have any experience with SAML integration, this is a normal SAML integration. So anything that you would like to integrate with Citrix Cloud, you can integrate this single sign-on. And the other part that we can provide access is when we are talking about our internal web apps. So basically, we are talking about on-prem or cloud data centers, and we provide VPN-less access to any internal web app. So with these technologies, we not only provide VPN-less access, we can also provide single sign-on. And this single sign-on will be basic single sign-on. We can integrate Kerberos, for-based authentication, and SAML. So all these four capabilities are built into Citrix Cloud to provide this seamless single sign-on when accessing to these internal web apps. And we are going to stop here just for a minute because this is a new tech preview that is coming. And as I mentioned, we don't want to replace any identity provider or any investment that the company or an IT admin has invested in your identity policies. So that means that we created a new feature, which is called simplified single sign-on. And basically, what we are doing is reutilizing the session for your primary identity provider and passing by to the Citrix Enterprise browser. So let's say that you have a software as a service app like Slack, Salesforce, Slack, Salesforce, Office 365, and you are using Azure as the identity provider for this application. With Citrix, you can reconfigure these three applications and point to Citrix to be the identity provider, or well, you can use your simplified single sign-on. And if you are using Azure Active Directory to access to your Workspace, you can reutilize this session inside your Citrix Enterprise browser and have seamless single sign-on inside the three applications that I mentioned. So you don't need to reconfigure anything. It's a PowerShell, you just enable, and you reutilize your primary identity provider session inside your Citrix Enterprise browser.
And we just had a question on that, actually, Javier. Just came in at the very same time that you were bringing that up. So, Terry, there is a blog on citrixie.com. I configured that one, I think, around how easy it is to do that simplified single sign-on. It's one PowerShell command. It's a new module. You set it up, and then you don't configure the SaaS app at all. Once they're pointing to the same source of truth, the same auth, way it works. It's really, really good. So highly recommend you go and check that out.
That's very good. And works like a charm. Once it's configured, it's very good. And it's going to make easy the IT admin life for this, because it's just, you just enable and everything works as it is. Because if you're creating something new, maybe you can use IDP for Citrix, but if you have everything configured, you don't need to work more for adapting this to Citrix. Now, we are going to talk about a very difficult topic. I'm going to try to summarize. We don't have too much time. This topic, only this topic can cover me an hour to explain. So I'm going to try to summarize and make it clear for all the audience as much as I can, okay? So when we are talking about modern authentication framework, there is two references in the market, SAML and OIDC, or OpenID Connect. And basically SAML and OpenID Connect are, I would say OpenID Connect is an evolution for SAML, and they are rebranding the names of the service provider, identity provider. So basically we have three components: the user or the client, okay? The user of the client, which is this one, the primary identity provider, in SAML is called IDP, in OpenID Connect is OpenID provider, but it's exactly the same component, and the service provider or relying partner in OpenID Connect. So these are the three components that we are using. And basically, the end user will be like this. So I'm going to talk about SAML, and I'm going to introduce the difference between OpenID Connect on SAML on this slide. So basically, a user agent that can be, for example, the identity provider can be Azure Active Directory, or Google. The service provider will be Workspace, and the user agent will be Workspace app. So I'm using Workspace app, and I'm trying to access to my cloud tenant or my store, which will be, I don't know, javilab.cloud.com. So I try to access to this Workspace tenant, and this Workspace tenant has Google as an identity provider configured for the end users. So when I reach this tenant, which is acting as a service provider, is going to send an authentication request and a 302 redirection to the Workspace app, and telling the Workspace app to redirect to this IDP when you're trying to access. So this authentication request, they will redirect, you try to access to Workspace, then the browser flips to Google, and you can see a Google prompt for username and password. This is the authentication. So the first type is accessing to the resources. The second part is the re-authentication, and there's a SAML request token for that. And the authentication kicks in, and I use Google, but you can use Okta or Azure Active Directory. Any conditional access policies, YubiKey, multi-factor authentication, everything that you have configured in your security authentication policies will kick in at this point, and you finalize the authentication, and you are correctly authenticated as a user. Then the assertion, the SAML assertion, will be sent back to the client, and then it will be sent back to the service provider. And the main difference when we are talking about OpenID Connect and SAML, and OpenID Connect is more modern than SAML, is OpenID Connect is using a REST API from the identity provider and the service provider that is able to communicate in the backend and do the attribute exchange without knowledge of the user. So the attribute exchange, when we are using OpenID Connect, is done in the backend between the IDP and the service provider. When we are using SAML, we have a SAML token that can be readable for the end client that will contain a certain types of attributes that can be readable on the SAML assertion. And if I go back to this, the SAML assertion will be redirected, or the OIDC token will be redirected to the service provider, and then the service resources, that means that you can access to your application. And try to summarize this in short time or make it understandable in one slide, but basically this is what is happening when you configure any modern authentication framework like SAML or OpenID Connect. And what we have, in the case of Azure Active Directory, is Azure Active Directory, for example, can be the identity provider, contains the username, password, and email. Citrix becomes the identity broker, and Citrix becomes identity provider from Salesforce. And if you can see the three common attributes between this authentication chain will be the email address. So you can see, once you authenticate in your Azure Active Directory, you have your session in Citrix, and with your session in Citrix, you can open your session in Salesforce and have single sign-on all across the board. And the common attribute, obviously, there is a trust between the identity providers, so there is a trust between these two and between these two, okay? But besides that, the common attribute when you are doing the user authentication will be the email, okay? And that's the question that the people were asking before regarding the what attributes we need to do when we are trying to sync SAML between your Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, and Workspace. And basically, when we talk about Active Directory, every time that you create a user, every user that you create in Active Directory have an immutable ID, which is the security ID, user principal name, object GUID, and email. So these four attributes that we have in Active Directory, we need to sync the user with these attributes and their values inside Azure Active Directory. And the way that we do that is with Azure AD Connect. In the case of Azure Active Directory, we have a Google Cloud Directory Sync for Google, and for Okta is a Cloud Okta Directory Sync. I don't remember the name now, but basically it's an agent that you deploy in your Active Directory or beside your Active Directory. And what it does is transfer all the user with their properties into the identity provider of your choice. Okay, so this is exactly the same thing that we are talking about. So this is my Active Directory. I have my username. I have my object GUID, my security ID, and my user principal name. So when I talk about Azure, I sync this into Azure Active Directory, you can see that the email is synced, immutable ID, which is the security ID, the SID, and the object GUID are synced with this. And when we are using SAML, the same attributes that we see here are sent readable in the SAML assertion. So you can see in the SAML response here, you can see all the users' attributes and the values inside the SAML assertion. So if you have any SAML tracer, you can do this. I have another blog that is really talking about how, yeah?
I think I put the whole Citrix IE site in, so everyone should get all those blogs now.
So we have another blog and show you different SAML tracer tools and some tools that you can use to troubleshoot these areas. But the key component for FAST is that you are syncing the SSID, user principal name, object GUID, and email from your Active Directory to your IDP to toll back with your Workspace. And this will be both a requirements for SAML and OpenID Connect. Okay. And now, we are almost the hour, so I'm going to be fast on this. So in the very beginning, I was using this diagram when we were using Google or the primary identity provider. But what will happen if we like to open any Salesforce, for example, as a software as a service apps? So Salesforce, so Workspace that adds before as a service provider, now becomes identity provider. So that means that when I configure Salesforce or any software as a service apps inside Citrix, the role of the service provider and identity provider swaps. So now Workspace is the identity provider. And we have the single sign-on microservice and the gateway microservice that is going to do us this single sign-on magic. So Workspace app is not going to be the client. What is going to be the client is software as a service app any software as a service app browser for Windows, for example, when I click Salesforce, and I can use Office 365, Word, or Salesforce as an example. And basically, all the authentication protocol that I was explaining before will happen at the same time. But in this case, it's going to be seamless for the end user. So we will send a resource request, an authentication request. The authentication will be happen seamlessly on Citrix Cloud with the single sign-on microservice. We'll redirect the assertion. We will open Salesforce, and Salesforce is automatically single sign-on. So all these steps that I was explaining exactly in the primary identity provider will happen when we open a software as a service app, but it will be seamless for the end user. So in other words, I just click in Salesforce, and I open Salesforce, and I automatically single sign-on. Okay, so that's the magic of this software as a service single sign-on implementation. So here it is. You have, I think Wendy has shared with the group. If you want to integrate Salesforce as a SAML, you can do creating a free developer account for Salesforce, and you can do this. Okay, and we are almost finished, and we are going to do the final demo from a hybrid single sign-on with a Windows Azure client-based authentication. So there is a lot of things going on here, but hopefully it's going to be clear for all the people after this. And this is a very powerful demo. We know that a lot of companies are requiring to do this Office single sign-on to the VDA, using Azure as an IDP. How can I provide single sign-on when I'm in the desktop to any Office 365 application? So we can achieve that. And with Citrix, this is a completely GA, is integrated, so you can deploy this in any production environment. I believe Microsoft is coming there, but this doesn't have anything GA as long as I know, or as far as I know. So in this case, we are going to start with the device. The device is going to be a Windows corporate device. In my case, it's going to be an Intune enrolled device. But any Azure AD join, hybrid join, or Azure AD registered device will have the same behavior. So when we try to access to Workspace, Workspace has configured Azure Active Directory as an identity provider, and as we have a session on the operating system, we are going to provide single sign-on to the desktop. So I click the desktop, and we are going to have automatically single sign-on. Once I'm in the desktop, I configure Azure certificate-based authentication, and I can reutilize the certificate that I generate from the Federation Authentication Services to generate a primary refresh token. Okay, so this primary refresh token will be the component or the tool that is going to generate single sign-on to any Office 365 in the application. So basically, to summarize very quickly, the end user experience is single sign-on all across the board. So very quickly, I'm going to log into my Windows device. I have Windows Hello, so I can log in with my camera, or I can log in with Windows PIN. Okay, so I'm logging. I don't have, this device is Azure Active Directory joined and managed by Intune. So you can see that I have my corporate background desktop. And if I check the account of this device, you can see that this device will be Azure Active Directory joined, and also is managed by Intune. So I can apply all the policies remotely, and this integration is working really well. So we start from a managed device, and if I try to access to Workspace, I can have auto-populated the URL, but in this case I didn't do for the demo purpose, javilab.cloud.com. So I try to access to my Workspace, and here we are going to see the magic happen. So this device currently have a primary refresh token valid, and Azure Active Directory is the IDP for Workspace. And what will happen is we are going to provide a seamless single sign-on to this Workspace. For the end users, they just click, open Workspace, and they have access to all the apps. But as an IT admin, this is all the configuration that we have done to make all this magic happens. And then it will be exactly the same as before. So if I try to access to my desktop and I open my Windows 10 multi-session, let's see if this doesn't take too long. Let's see. You know, when you are doing live demos, sometimes take more time than you expected.
A great question just came in about encoding and decoding the attributes. And I know you were involved in doing this with the immutable ID. So
yeah, all the attributes, and we have a problem with Google because all the encoding of the attributes needs to be in base 64 URL. And we have to manually overwrite some of the attributes to base 64 URL for Google because Google was not able to do in their application. So yeah, the encryption, if you need to do for Okta or any other IDP, it will be base 64 URL. Okay, and here it is.
One last question, just while that's doing preparing Windows. Maybe I missed it. Someone just put it in the chat. But does SAML integration require SPA? Which it doesn't, right? I was on one slide and it seemed to infer that it does require it. So just to confirm to everybody that SAML obviously for single sign-on into the VDAs requires a sync from AD, but the question is specifically around different IDPs like RSA and Duo.
Yep. So
Cool.
I think SAML is integrated as long as you have the gateway. You don't need to have secure access. You can have only DAS, and DAS will work with SAML. You can configure SAML with your DAS service. So this.
That's perfect. Hope that answers the question.
Status. So here it is. So if you can see, took some time, but my desktop is here. And if you see, we had single sign-on. And what caused this single sign-on to happen? I don't know if it's going to be very small, but if you can see here, they will be Citrix authentication policy. And here you can see that the identity assertion logon coming from federated authentication service is generating, this is the server, and is generating a certificate that is provided this single sign-on experience when accessing to the VDA, okay? So that's what happens in the first moment. After that, we configure Azure to activate the certificate-based authentication. So that means in the same logon, we can create, obviously, the condition for this to happen is you need to have a hybrid joint VDA, Azure Active Directory and Active Directory. And what will happen is the single sign-on state will create a primary refresh token for Azure. And that will originate all the single sign-on to open to any Office 365. So if I open Office, you can see that I will be automatically logging in with my credentials. And to show how everything works, I can sign out from Office. I can try to sign in, select my user, continue, and you get the end user experience. I don't have to type any username and password anymore. And the same will happen if I try to open Internet or Microsoft Edge, and I look for my mail, for example. Outlook 365, and I try to access to my Outlook mail, which will be this URL.
Just while you're opening that, there's a question in there, Javi, just while you're opening that, is there any Citrix hosted FAS? Unfortunately, there isn't at the moment.
That's correct. So you can see, we have single sign-on to all the Office 365 in the VDA. And that doesn't matter that you are using persistent or non-persistent VDAs. This single sign-on will work out of the box in any VDA deployment. Okay, so Sorry, I think I got 10 minutes more, but basically what we try to achieve, so from the beginning of the presentation, what we were discussing is we have to remember our username, password, and what we are going to do is trying to simplify the end user life from the IT admin and the end users, and just provide a seamless single sign-on experience when integrating all your applications with Citrix. And that was the purpose of this presentation. Hope you enjoy it.
So much, Javi. What if I have to say, I know an awful lot of work went in to pull that together. So even as a fellow Citrite, I just wanted to say amazing job. I'll hand back to you, Stephanie, now to wrap it up.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here today. And I think that, we were talking a little bit beforehand that we might get more sessions like this out of this duo. So fingers crossed. All right. Well, you will get an email tomorrow with the links that were shared today, as well as a link to the recording. So just be on the lookout for that. And as always, really appreciate you being on today. And thank you so much, Javier. Thank you, Wendy. Pleasure to have you today.
Thank you very much.
Delighted. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye.